Hey everybody, welcome back to Great Mondays Radio. Woo, I am very excited to talk to today's guest, Jeanne Bauer-Hamlett. She is the Vice President of HR for the Solutions and Services Group at Lenovo. And she's been in HR for a while. She has some stories to share, some wisdom to impart, and I'm really excited to have her on. Jeanne, thank you for coming on Great Mondays Radio.
Josh, thank you so much for inviting me. It's exciting to be here.
Yeah,
Excited to share some stories.
yeah. Well, so look, this is a lot of folks in our audience are HR leaders like yourself, and they've had different moments of realization around culture. And I wanted to hear about yours. What Not everybody has that opportunity to go, get smacked in the forehead with culture. What was that? Is there a moment where you just felt you're like, oh yeah, this is really important. This is something that matters to me or can matter to the organization. What was that moment?
I actually think it was at the point that I joined Lenovo. Now I've joined Lenovo twice, right? I
Mhm.
joined originally in 2007, and that was just after the point that Lenovo had, the old legacy organization in China had purchased the IBM PC division. And I think that, in my past, I had always worked for established companies. And not only was Lenovo a growth company, was an up and comer in the PC industry, but it was merging an East and a West culture.
Yeah.
Very much a Chinese-based culture, and of course a global culture from IBM. And I never really realized how, two cultures could actually, be so different and had such an impact on the organization as a whole. And I think to kind of throw another, kind of wrench in the whole mix is, our CEO at that time was from Dell, and he brought in a whole lot of people from Dell. And
Yep.
so not only did you have an IBM culture and Chinese native culture, you had the Dell culture as well. And all three were very, very different. And
Yeah.
I think we started seeing, some outcomes of things that indicated that we all had to get on the same page culturally about how we wanted to work with each other, how we wanted the organization to operate, and how we wanted to have relationships with each other.
So this is Uh, I I know that, and I've talked about before, and I've had the experience of being part of a few mergers and acquisitions. And mergers and acquisitions brings together different cultures, even if they're from the same region. Now,
Yes.
you just called out, you said there was a Chinese culture, there was a global culture, there was the Dell culture, which is kind of Texan, maybe. I don't know. So you have the corporate culture, but you also have the, I don't know, capital C culture of like different regions. What did that Was it all one and the same, or did you observe that some of the cultural differences that are sort of like the most different were because of the capital C culture from different um I don't countries and sort of histories, I guess.
I think there was a little bit of that. I think there was a little bit of just, the cultures that came from other companies that made them successful. Dell had a very aggressive, heads down culture, whereas, Lenovo grew from humble beginnings, very much ground up. IBM, big blue, very big background. I mean, it was somewhat, I mean, country wise, but it was very much just different from, where those companies were coming from
Yeah.
too, and their roots.
Were there any explicit efforts to either acknowledge or reconcile or bring into alignment the different cultures? Because this is, look, I've been involved in some serious M&A culture work, and that pales in comparison to what I think what you're describing. So tell me, what was that
Yeah.
like? How are you still standing?
It was really interesting. The chairman at the time, Chairman Liu, realized that we had to come together under one unified culture. And he called it the Lenovo Way. It's
Oh,
actually
fantastic.
a book. It was written by our head of HR at the time and our head of, diversity and culture. And, they talked very much, with the chairman about what he wanted the culture to be. And he came out with something called the 4 Ps. And it really defined, the way that he wanted the organization to operate. Plan, perform, practice, prioritize, and eventually we added a fifth around pioneering, very much. And it was interesting because when we first started, we needed to come to consensus around how we were going to plan for the future. What was going to be our strategy? That was like step one.
Mm,
And we all got aligned around a global strategy that was going to take Lenovo at that time from fourth or fifth to number one in the world. Then the second step was really around practice. There's a practice in China called the Fupan, where we would replay the chessboard. And that's when we take a step back and we see, what did we do really well with this? And what didn't we do so well and we can improve for the next time? And it kind of was an evolution as we worked through all those cultural tenets
mm.
that he kind of set forth to us and said, look, this is the Lenovo way. This is the way we're going to operate. And if everybody comes under these principles, we're going to be able to trust each other because we know what to expect from one another.
Here's what I think. I think that's all really great, and be able to, um, what I would say is identify and codify that culture. So you're codifying it
Right.
with this framework, the 4 Ps, the 5 Ps in a book. But what is more compelling to me, and a piece that I think a lot of leaders miss, is that strategic alignment with that, what you just described, the plan to get to number one. And so
Yes.
hey, we need to improve our culture. And it's like, why? Well, we need to do X, Y, it's like we need to hang on to more employees. We need to work better together. And those are all fine and well and good. And having that unified vision around, like, this is how we win,
Yeah.
that
Yes.
I'm guessing that that's the fire that everybody felt, in their pants, right? Where it's like, that's the reason. Is that the reason that everybody went, oh, I
Light
see.
bulb.
That's what,
Right.
yes, light bulb, the light bulb moment. And
It,
it just, yeah, tell me,
no,
tell
I
me.
think no, and that's exactly why I started with plan. I mean, because at the time, everybody was trying to do something different based on what had worked for their organization. What had worked for Lenovo Legacy might not work for this new entity.
Yeah,
What worked for IBM PC division might not have worked for this new entity.
yeah.
And the perspective that our CEO came with, this is what worked at Dell. Heck, Dell's were number one at the time, or number two.
It worked
So
for us. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I think at the end of the day, the realization with our senior leadership team was, in order to really take this organization forward and to be number one, you had to figure out what it was going to take for this organization culturally and not anything else.
Mm,
And strategically, where's the boat pointed and where are we all going to row together to get there? That was
yeah.
it. That was
That's
it.
that's great. And it just, it's, when you say it, it sounds so blindingly
Yeah.
obvious, but I mean, to be able to say, even that, like, we're number four, here's how we're going to get to number one, here's how we're going to win, like, articulate. Do you, in your experience, let's go outside of that immediate application, in your
Mm-hmm.
experience, is like, are there other ways to articulate that? Like, I know that there's a lot of organizations that I've worked with where it's like, hey, we're one or two and we swap back and forth, or, it's always kind of a fight, or it's not as explicit as, hey, boop, fresh start, new organization, and now we're going for number one. And that's the brilliance of that. What else, like, what can someone learn if they're in an organization? It's not a fresh start. It's, it's like, what's the flavor of these visions that can set that fire for people to go, oh, that's why culture is important.
It's interesting that you say that, because I think we have a little bit of that going on when SSG was created.
Mm. And
Because
that's your team, the solutions and services. Okay.
exactly, on April 1st of 2021, so a little over 3 years ago, Lenovo made the decision. So, after acquiring, obviously we acquired IBM's server division, we acquired Motorola. That was a further, evolution to our culture through, the addition of, pretty significant parts of our business, right? In an effort to diversify outside of PCs to kind of get some related, related products. But I think along the way, you know, our CEO made the decision and said, you know what, in order to take this company past, being a product company, we have to look to our customers who are telling us they want solutions and they really want services. And
Mm-hmm.
so pulling those pieces out of product business units and just having one business unit focused on services, that this transition has been interesting within Lenovo, because again, as we created SSG, we had to have a little bit different. We had to align with the rest of the organization culturally, but we had to emphasize a couple things like entrepreneurship, customer focus. What is our customers telling us? What do they need from us in terms of
Mm-hmm.
services? Is
Mm-hmm.
it just around the box services? I mean, yeah, do I want a warranty with a PC, or do I want a partner that can help me, solve my ESG problems? Or, maybe I want to give a better customer experience or employee experience. So maybe I want your DWS solution. So I feel like it's interesting because we were in that same kind of boat. We were
Right.
all with Lenovo, all one, everybody's rowing along, and suddenly we said, hey, now we're going to sell services, which is much different than selling product.
So what worked? So again, you have a microcosm of that. What worked over here is going to be a little bit different.
Yes.
So, so many questions. Let's start with what how did you decide to articulate what was going to be the same, what was going to be different, what was going to be like? So when I think about regions or buildings or divisions,
Mm-hmm.
or there's like the culture, there's like the pervasive piece of culture that is, for everybody, no matter where you are. But then there's also the
Right.
specific elements, which I think is what you were talking about as you started,
Yes.
right? Because you're still part of the same
Yeah,
company, and yet we need to.
exactly.
So,
Exactly.
so what, did you, were you able to identify what was going to be the same and what was going to be different? And if so, how?
I think it all goes back to the strategy of what we wanted to do, right? And so when we sat down as a new leadership team and SSG was created,
Yeah.
it was really interesting because, we had to maintain a very close, relationship and be able to work well within the organization and partner with the other business units. But we also had to go out on our own and look to build a managed services portfolio that was outside of that product piece. And
Yeah.
so when we kind of sat down and thought about it, we looked at our cultural values and, all of the things that we do. We said, at the end of the day, I think we really want to make sure that as an organization, we emphasize the fact that we are going to have to be innovative. It doesn't mean we're building a better PC, but we have to be innovative when it comes to what kind of services we can provide to our customers. And we have to not only figure that out, but we have to figure out how we're going to pull them together, how we're going to package them to the customer, how we're going to sell them, how we're going to
Mm,
market them, all very different than what we do within the organization today. So we
right,
have to be a little entrepreneurial in terms of how we're going to think out of the box and actually make this happen. Because a lot of
right.
you
Yeah.
know, it's always said, people say it's a lot easier to incubate a business when it's just a standalone business. It's a lot harder to incubate a business within a bigger structured business, which is a lot different than what you have.
Yeah.
So
That makes a lot of sense. You are enlisting your group in the creation of the group, in the creation of
yeah.
what you're doing. And that's really interesting because there's a different kind of, and I think about startups. Okay, so what you were just saying, committing outside, there's a
Mhm.
certain kind of person that wants to be in the first 50 people, and then there's a certain kind of person that's gonna like grow it. And so
Yeah.
what you're asking is, hey, this group that we've assembled, we want you to actually start inventing and give you permission to do that. And I love that you're saying entrepreneurial. Hey, not over there, that's great. We want you to be more entrepreneurial. We want you to live that. And
Yeah.
that's going to help. That's going to be really the goal. So I'll bring it back to my how we got into this tentacle of what is that articulation? What's that vision? What's the fire? The fire is for SSG is we're creating a whole new group and we
That's
want
right.
you to help us invent that. And that's going to
That's
be the
exactly
journey
right.
for the foreseeable future, right? I mean, it takes a long
Yes.
time to establish something like that.
It does. It does. And it's interesting because as we go through this journey, you know, we continue to grow obviously our standard services, but we're also looking at, you know, as we talked about building new services, right? And in
Yeah.
order to do that, we've had to hire people into the organization. And, you know, services people that come from established services organization have their own culture, you know, very, very aggressive, very service focused, very,
Mhm.
very different than what we see today, even in SSG as we've evolved, right? And so it's interesting because what you're seeing now is a little bit of a mindset shift where, you know, we've brought people over from the rest of Lenovo. They have a services mindset, but always in the context of the product.
Yeah.
Now we're bringing in people into the organization who are pure services people, who potentially come from GSIs or other places that all they do is services. And
Yeah.
it's a very, very, it's customer zealots. It's
Yeah.
people who, what do the customers say? How are we going to deliver that? I mean,
Yeah.
it's very interesting. And it's an interesting, this is going to be an interesting time for our culture because of that.
Are you, is there let's see. So what would make for a good like a good candidate to be brought in from another services group? Like what's on the table, what's off the table,
Well, I think the first one is, you know, you have to have services expertise, right?
right? Because
I
that's what
think the other
you're building
one,
that
yeah,
muscle, right?
that's
So
right. We're
we're
building
bringing
the
you in for that.
muscle.
Yep.
And I want somebody who has, you know, alignment with, in general, our cultural values. We know that they're going to be aggressive. They're going to be,
Mm,
I think, you know, services focused.
yeah.
But I also need them to have somewhat of an interest in innovating and building and, you know, and not necessarily delivering, but also being part of a bigger corporate entity.
Mm,
Somebody who's able to kind of, I mean, we, you know, Lenovo is a matrix organization. It's not always easy to kind of walk into Lenovo and understand how you're
yeah.
going to operate in Lenovo, and
Yeah.
you have to
Yeah.
have that
Yeah.
ability too. So those are certainly, I think, among three of the big things that we look for.
Yeah. Do one more. I'm just so curious about this. So I know it's like we're going down it. So apologies in advance, but one more question if you'll
Sure.
put up with it. So do people do you feel like a candidate X has the ability to say to know whether they're willing to work inside of a large matrixed organization, or so you could ask them, hey, are you willing? Are you able to work inside of a large matrix? Or versus, are there other questions that you kind of get at that? Because it's a very different kind of thing. And so there's this tension between innovative, entrepreneurial, services driven, and then
Yeah,
this like matrixed. So it's like that's a pretty
it
interesting tension.
it is, and we ask.
Yeah.
As part of the interview process, and we try to be, obviously fleet when it comes to, going through interviews, but we want to make sure that for certain positions, potential candidates know what they're walking into. And we try to describe it as best we can.
Yeah, you want them to know. No
Yeah,
surprises.
yeah, no surprises. No harm, no foul. If somebody comes in, we've had this, happen where candidates come in, they try it for 6 months and say, you know what? I I love everybody who I work with. I enjoy the work. This is a tough environment. I just can't do it. Or, I just am not getting the whole matrix. I need to be in a little bit simple, corporate environment, and no harm, no foul. I mean, that's going to happen. That's going to happen.
I really appreciate the transparency and being able to articulate that up front, because it does feel like you're interviewing for an organization and you're like, is this it? Is this gonna work? It's like, I'm all
Yeah.
in, and you're like, uh-oh, this might not be a good fit. So there's something very
Yeah.
human about that and acknowledging that.
I think that post-COVID, I think candidates ask now. I
Mm,
think they really prioritize culture and work environment, and how am I going to relate to my coworkers, and, you know, what do they ask what we look for in candidates, and they ask right up front, what's your culture like?
mm,
So I think that in the last few years, what we've seen is a much better open dialogue with candidates, because, I think everybody's trying to make the right decision and make sure that there's a fit on both sides.
mhm. That's interesting to hear, and heartening too, right? Where it is
Yeah,
like, I understand. It's a reset in a way.
yeah,
It's like COVID really made us oh, I don't want to work where doesn't make sense for me. And so
that's right.
it's only serves us to be more transparent. All right, let's zoom out from this particular topic. So you did describe here what I would, I'd say a few very interesting moments. Are there any other achievements that stand out in your career, either at Lenovo or previously, that you feel like really punched above its weight in the cultural aspects of, it's like improving the culture or moving the culture in the right direction. You know what I mean?
I actually think it's with SSG.
Yeah.
This has been a great career opportunity for me. It's been a lot of hard work, continues to be, and it will be for a while, but for me, it's fun to build something like that. And I think in that first year, we do something at Lenovo. We do an engagement survey every year called Lenovo Listens.
Mhm.
And, in that first year, you kind of never know what you're going to get. You
Yeah.
don't know how people are feeling. This was a tremendous change. And, we continue to have very, very high engagement scores. We started out with high engagement scores. People are engaged. They give honest feedback about places that, we need to improve. whether it's a process or tools or,
Mhm.
and I'm always happy because, it's things that we can fix. It's
That
maybe,
is a gift.
better tools. Right, right. But when it comes to things like, our culture and the way we treat employees and our well-being and those types of
Yeah,
things, we score high and we've maintained it. And I think for me, as with all the transformation that we've gone through and the
yeah,
hiring that we've gone through,
yeah, yeah.
to kind of maintain that high level to me is quite an achievement. And certainly that's not something I do by myself. It's with my HR team and it's with our leadership team. And we're, like we talked about, we're all rowing in the same direction.
That's amazing. So I'll just repeat it. That is a real gift, and I think we all know that that's not always the
Yeah.
case. One of the
No.
big challenges with those surveys or even asking for opinions is that they don't go into a black box, that employees know that they are being listened to. And what always baffles me is you get thousands of pieces of feedback. How do you articulate, or do you, that, hey, we hear you, this is something that we take seriously, so that they stay engaged and they're willing to give their opinion? Because if I keep submitting my my challenge and no one says, oh, I heard you, or it doesn't, and obviously if it doesn't get addressed, but also like we just can't do that now, or is there some way that you're communicating with your employees about that?
Mhm. Yeah, after we typically do the engagement survey in the summer, we're going to every other year. We're doing full survey and then pulse checks. But
Hmm.
after we do a full survey, I get the results, I review it with the senior leadership team. We kind of pick out the areas that are in the, bottom 10 questions, and we kind of look at those buckets and say,
Hmm.
okay, and I do an analysis and say, look, here's where we've kind of improved from last year. Here's the
Mm.
things that employees are telling us that,
Hmm.
hey, you've done a better job. Here's the areas where, nah, still have a problem. And here's the things that you keep doing well. And so I remind the senior leadership team, and they go and they look at their results one level down, build action plans, and we do it as a senior leadership team for all of SSG. And in the next all hands, after we do that, I stand up in front of SSG employees and talk about, here's what our trends are. Here's what we've done over the past couple of years with Lenovo Listens. Here's where we've improved. Here's what you've told us you want us to work on, and here's what we worked on. And so we hold ourselves accountable
Amazing.
by very publicly talking about, and I will say it's not just SSG. I think that's a cultural thing that Lenovo has always done from the beginning. I
Mm.
think this is one of the areas that I think Lenovo does best. It asks the question and it takes action on the feedback that it gets back.
That is really wonderful, because the most important element, the kernel of any culture, is going to be trust. And there's no easier
Yeah,
way to decay trust, right? Degrade trust than be like, hey, how should we improve? And then they never hear it. So it sounds like, to
right.
me, what I take from this is, um, you and the leadership team take these surveys and this feedback very seriously.
We
And it,
do.
it's because the problem is that it takes so much time and energy to absorb, to deploy it, to analyze it. You're like, oh, I got so many other things, trash
You're
cans on
right.
fire, right? Like I got to do
Yeah,
things,
you're right.
right? And
That's
so it's
right.
that
That's right.
I think that's why that many organizations fall down on this.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
real, it's a real effort. It takes a lot of hours and brain bandwidth to really do it
Yeah.
well.
You are 100% right. And
Hmm.
and the key point is to do it well. And I think this is, but you do something well when it's important to you. And the way I look at it is, if our employees are taking the time to fill out 30 questions. It's not a small survey, right? It
Mhm.
takes time, then the least we can do is listen to the feedback and take actions, accordingly.
Yeah.
So,
What is something that you an obstacle to your current culture that you're trying to tackle coming up? What's sort of the main thing? I mean, maybe we've already touched on it, and that's a fine answer too, of like this entrepreneurial piece of it. But is there something that you're looking at and you're like, okay, this is the next big rock we have to really look at?
I think it's probably continuing rock. And I think we talked a little bit about it, is making sure that, we continue to hire planfully. And making sure that, we stay in line, we give people the right opportunities, we get the right people in with the right
Mm,
mindset. I mean, we all know, like you said, we've got things on fire, we're trying to hire people quickly. And I think that you
yeah.
have to be patient. You have to be planful around who you bring into the organization so it's the right thing for both parties. And you gotta find the right candidate.
How do you make sure that your team doesn't hire too quickly? Because that is problematic, right? You're like, that's the
It is.
solution. I just need more
Yeah.
bodies, right? Like, I'm
It
sure people are, I don't know. I mean, are they begging? They're like, please, can we have more headcount? And you're like, yes, but, or something like that. I mean, how are you, how are you making sure that the people who are making those hires are doing it, like you said, planfully, thoughtfully, and not just reaction, in a
you
reactive manner?
I think this is one of the lessons learned, I would tell you, over the past 3 years. I mean,
Love it.
unfortunately, you kinda you kinda have to learn from, like, when you did
Yeah.
it not maybe for the best. And I think all of our leaders, they're very experienced. I think some of them are newer, and I think that was a learning process.
Yeah.
I think during the pandemic when talent was scarce, we hired somebody who was close. They're close enough.
Yeah.
They're good, they're
Yeah.
close enough. And to the leaders' credit, some of these folks, came on board and flourished and are great.
Mm,
Were great fits. In some cases, they weren't.
hmm.
And when you kind of step back and say, and I'm fortunate because we have a great talent acquisition team and
Mm,
I have a great HR team who sits down with the leaders and say, okay, let's FOOP on what worked, what would you do different, what kind of, where would you change, the hiring profile or the hiring spec. And I think it all comes back to, I knew that this person might not be the right fit, but I went ahead anyway.
mm, yeah.
And you learn. You just learn.
The difference between, hearing the principle and living with the consequence of it.
That's
And I
right.
think it's just experience, like you said. I think
Yep.
that's the big opportunity. And as long as I'm okay. I like to think about, I'm okay if you make a mistake. I'm dubious if you're making the same mistake. I want you to make new mistakes. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like that's what
That's
I'm
right.
that's what I
That's
want.
right.
Like mistakes are
That's right.
fine as long as you've learned from them, you're moving them on, right?
That
That's what I'm hoping for.
That's exactly right. And that's and that's what's so great about my HR team is they watch like hawks.
Oh,
And they're
good.
like,
Yeah.
they're like, I'm not gonna let you make this mistake again, and neither is our TA team. And so we try to give our managers as much support as they need to, really kind of make the right decisions.
I think that's a great place to leave it. That I think is a really good learning of, it's the thoughtful, it's going to benefit you to be more planful in your hiring, even when, it's a crisis inside,
That's right.
you
That's
know?
right. The
Yeah.
temptation is great, but
It is. Yes, that's right. That's right. Oh,
yeah, don't
that's,
do it. Don't
that's the
do it.
emotion. I don't know how to write
That's
that. Like, if I could write that as the title of the episode. Um, Jeanne Bauer-Hamlett, VP of HR Solutions and Services Groups at Lenovo. You can, of course, head over to lenovo.com. Jeanne has also said that if you're interested and want to reach out, she's open to communicating on LinkedIn, so you can check her out. Jeanne, Jeanne, Bauer-Hamlett, Bauer Hamlett. Jeanne, thank you for coming on Great Mondays Radio. This was so
Oh,
insightful.
it was great. Thanks so much, Josh. It was great to be here. Thanks for the invite.